Give me either the either or the either. I told you we're out of Phoenix Down. Okay, alright.
Hi, you're listening to MAGE CAST, the ensemble podcast by the well-read mage and a cast of mages. Each episode, I sit down with my rotating panel of guests to have some civil discourse about a single game. We're a group of games writers dedicated to long-form content and critique. You can find us on WordPress at thewellreadmage.com, on Twitter at thewellreadmage, and on YouTube. Crowdfunding support makes projects like MageCast possible. If you enjoy our work, written or otherwise, you can check out our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/thewellreadmage for more information on exclusives, rewards, and our vision for a future of better games writing and a friendlier gaming community. Links are in the description. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share MageCast with your fellow adventurers. Leave us a review, too. Oh, and now let's start the show. Heroine. I had to look up the pronunciation earlier to make sure that I didn't say it wrong. Heroine. Heroine. I don't know. It's kind of an awkward word.
Yeah.
I think that's why a lot of people have invented the word shiro. Have you heard that?
No.
Well, it's obviously like hero,
right.
but with she, right?
Yeah.
Shiro.
Like heroin is something else.
Yeah. Heroin sounds a little addictive.
Yeah.
So this is going to be our 9th episode of MageCast. We're approaching our 10th. Thank you very much for listening this whole time, if you have been. If not, well, you can find all these podcasts pretty much where podcasts are listened to. I don't know. Name me a place where you can't find MageCast, and I will get MageCast there. How's that? But you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, SoundCloud, and now Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout has been kind enough to help us out with a podcast network sponsorship that we're getting to be a part of with Opinioneering and Little Fella Media. So we're looking forward to building our relationships there. I also, speaking of relationships, want to give a special shout out to 2 new patrons that we got on Patreon. They are Shadow Saotome and Playjack. You two are excellent individuals with exquisite taste in brands to support, I guess. So thanks very much for your support. We're going to make sure that we turn it into pure content and just be able to feed right back into this system. We're going to be also, speaking of content, launching a new podcast called MAGE CAST Side Quests, led by the ABXY Mage. He's on Twitter at ABXY Reviews. Now, we've kind of been teasing side quests for a while now, but this is officially the launch date. We are going to go live with MageCast Side Quests on the 29th. That's November 29th. So mark your calendars. Do people still mark their calendars? I don't think so. But if you're the kind who marks calendars, go ahead and mark your calendar. That's November 29th, which is a Thursday. All right, it's going to be an awesome Thursday, you guys. You'll be able to find side quests, same place that you can find MageCast. So look out for that. It's going to be exciting. I appeared on it. It's going to be led by ABXY, though, not myself. But we talked about the evolution of video game music over time from sort of the earliest arcade era through the Commodore 64 up until the modern era. So a lot to cover. We're going to release smaller episodes, but in a batch on launch day. And they're going to be just really supplementary, briefer, more digestible, let's put it that way, episodes. So I'm looking forward to that. But today is another episode of MageCast. And today I'm sitting down with one of our founding members who, what is this, your 4th appearance?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so you were on Journey.
Yep, I was on Journey, Alien Isolation, and Final Fantasy Tactics.
Yeah. Okay, so this is your 4th appearance. This is Cameron, the Timely Mage. So go ahead and just, you've been here a while, so you might be new to some people, but if you are, they can just go back and listen to your spiel. So you don't have to tell your life story again. But you could talk about a little bit about what you're playing right now.
Oh, well, as it happens, I'm playing No Man's Sky.
Still?
They just released another big update just yesterday. So,
Oh, really?
yeah, so I just hopped back on there and, check it out. And yeah, it's been fun. I'm actually kind of in a awkward period with gaming because I'm in the middle of moving. I'm living with my in-laws right now, so I don't really get much time on TV anymore. So I want to play a lot of different games like Assassin's Creed, Odyssey, Red Dead Redemption 2, etc. There's a ton of games on my waiting list right now. But a couple more weeks and I should be back in the game. So
Nice. Yeah. I imagine once you get your house, you're like, set up the TV now.
Oh yeah, that's
Like
going
all
up before like the beds and the the
Before the
fridge.
beds. Oh yeah.
The essentials. You gotta prioritize.
No, exactly. But, yeah, especially the feeling of like missing out on several big titles.
Oh
right
yeah,
now.
yeah.
A lot of those are going to probably win some awards. We're looking forward to the Game Awards coming up pretty soon. Yeah, the Game Awards will be on December 6th. I'm going to watch it. Red Dead Redemption 2, I'm pretty sure was one of the Game of the Year nominees, right?
Oh, it's going to be a real tight race, for Game of the Year. There's some really, really good games this year. So
I think God of War will take it.
I don't know, man.
All right, what's your bid?
I'd probably say God of War is my bid, but Spider-Man got a lot of praise. I doubt it'll win over God of War or Red Dead Redemption 2. I have a feeling it's going to be Red Dead because it's multi-plat. It's more popular. I think in one of the previous ones, I was kind of surprised that The Last of Us didn't win that year over. I think it was GTA 5 had won, which
GTA always wins.
Right,
everything.
exactly. So and these are made by the same people. So I think, and not to say that it's not warranted. I mean, I'm sure it's really, really.
But it's not The Last of Us. Be a little more inflammatory than that. Come on.
Yeah. So I mean, I was really upset that year. I was like, this is garbage.
Turn this crap off. That was like last year when we were watching Game Awards together, and then Breath of the Wild won, and you stopped responding.
Yeah.
I was like, I think he stopped watching.
I just gave up. I'm going to bed.
So that was actually, we talked about this on the Breath of the Wild podcast episode, which is available. That was the first time Nintendo won Game of the Year at the Game Awards, including its predecessor, the Spike Video Game Awards show.
Oh yeah.
So 15 years, I think, is what we looked at. 15, 16 years.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So it was about time. But
yeah.
But anyway, this year, it's Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Celeste, which is really cool to me to see an indie.
Yeah, that is really cool.
There.
I haven't played it, but yeah.
Yeah, I haven't played it either. I read a review that we had submitted to the Well-Read Mage by the Ink-Stained Mage. I thought it was really fascinating how they built the gameplay around the concept of like depression and anxiety and things like mental health. Very interesting.
And luckily for me, not too much has been spoiled besides just that little tidbit that you put in there.
That's sort of like the gimmick of the game, I guess you could say.
And I love the art style, and if I ever go into it, I'm glad I'll hopefully by then go into it a little bit, a little fresh, where I don't know the story or characters.
No, I won't talk about that.
So
I don't really know it myself either.
Yeah,
but and then you've got, of course, God of War. Then you've got Marvel's Spider-Man. This one was a surprising choice to me to appear on a Game of the Year list, is Monster Hunter World.
Yeah, it is a bit surprising, but in a way, it's not. I don't know. I can really see it on there because it was a really interesting game because I had never played a Monster Hunter before,
right?
But this game, was just so we got so passionate about it, especially leading up to its release, and then finally being able to play alongside you guys. This is one of the very few games where I was playing it alongside friends from the beginning, where we would just talk about it even if we weren't playing together. it really rallied up this new, not new necessarily, but like a really big community, really supportive community, and so I think people are still really passionate about it. They're still releasing content, I believe.
Yeah.
So
I agree with that. They were doing a Final Fantasy crossover, which I thought was really cool.
yeah,
Its social aspect and it's the amount of sales that it saw. Certainly are two things that earn it a spot on this list. I think it sort of gets bland after a while.
yeah,
Like previous Monster Hunters that I've played, where it's like grind for gear again.
yeah.
But pretty dang cool game. I just don't think God of War is going to smash it in the face.
Oh yeah,
In my opinion.
Yeah, I don't
'Cause
think
God of I have not heard a single negative thing said about God of War ever.
Yeah.
This God of War particularly.
yeah.
And then Red Dead Redemption 2, if you like watching a horse poop in real time. There you go. So you've got sort of like fantasy Assassin's Creed, like the series that's very like well founded. Then you've got the indie. Then you've got just like the art piece. Then you've got everybody's favorite superhero. Then you've got this like blown out of the water, huge sales, Monster Hunter. And then you've got like this ultra immersive, super realistic. People are just like, Red Dead Redemption 2 is so realistic. And then I saw a guy racing his horse across like the roofs in this city. I was like, okay, all right. But anyway, may the best game win. I would probably vote for Celeste, but
Oh come on.
I would it's cool to see an indie up there, and what I know about its game design.
Well, you gotta,
Because otherwise, the only games I've played on here are Spider-Man and Monster Hunter World, and to me, those are not GOT wise.
Oh, okay.
I think Monster Hunter World gets a little bland eventually. There's certainly a ton of content, but yeah. And then Spider-Man I had issues with, obviously, too.
Yeah.
But if I had played God of War,
right,
I'm sure that, I would be like, but that's why I'm guessing it's going to win anyway.
Yeah.
So your guess is?
My guess is Red Dead Redemption 2.
Okay. And
my
your
vote
bid would
is
be?
for God of War.
Okay. I think your vote's going to count.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm just going to say that. I've heard some negative things about Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yeah.
Where people are like, friggin' I got to ride my horse for an hour? But hey, that immersion. So anyways, getting back to our subject at hand, the subject that the subject that we're talking about today is not Game of the Year 2018. Came out in 2017, and it is Cosmic Star Heroine. This game was made by Zeboyd Games. And what are some sort of impressions and highlights when you think about this game? What are some things that come to mind?
Well, I mean, for me, this is like, I don't know, maybe the best game that I've played when it comes to like modern retro games done right. I mean, I don't know. It took me a while to really understand why. I mean, like I just instantly when I started it up, I felt immersed back in my childhood, and from beginning to end, it was just like I was playing as a kid, not as an adult, reliving nostalgia. I was back to being playing how I used to, and so and with that same excitement and wonder, and it took me a while to figure out why. I had no idea why it was so, what set it apart from others that, so many other indie games try to be really nostalgic, really classic, but then they don't quite hit you at that same way.
Right.
So, it took me a while to kind of define it after I beat the game. And So
now with that, why do you think, and this is great. This is something that I sort of touched on when I wrote my review for this game. Was it's extremely successful in that transportive manner where you feel like you really are not just playing a game from the 90s, but that you're playing it in the 90s.
Right.
So that the game is not so much more than just influenced by or evocative of, but it feels sort of timeless in that sense, because there's a lot of modernity in this game too. to where you feel like, okay, this is an improvement on things that were done in the 90s or innovated in the 90s. But at the same time, it feels very much like it belongs in the classic era. So when I was thinking about writing on this game, I was trying to think about buzzwords and flavor terms that are used in the industry today. You see retro throwback a lot, pixel art a lot, things like that you'll see classic a lot too. Yeah. But it's like, what do those words actually mean? Like, what does classic mean?
Yeah.
That's going to mean something different to different people.
Right, yep.
Because, like, let's say you're 15 years old. Classic to you is going to be, like, what, late 2000s at best, you know?
Right.
But classic to us, we're in our early 30s. That's going to be late 80s, early 90s, or mid 90s up until the 2000s and stuff like that. But retro throwback, I think that a lot of games, like you're touching on, a lot of indies try to grasp at those ideas, typically in terms of visuals. I mean, I'm sure you've played a ton of retro throwback indies that nail sort of the pixel visuals. Yeah. But when you play them, you find out there's not a lot of substance there that evokes that era. So I think that like you're right. That is something that's special about this game, in that its structure, its design, is deliberately 90s-esque.
Yeah. And like, and I want to make like a little distinguishment too that I just thought of right now. Like there seems to be like when it comes to like the pixel art, the aesthetic, kind of having a resurgence nowadays. I think it kind of split off now to where there's those that are trying to really hit on nostalgia and make it feel like you're playing a game from the 90s. And then there's those that are taking that same aesthetic, but just but really modernizing it, really making it something accessible now. They're not really trying to make you feel like it's a game from the 90s, but they're just exploring a new, a style of art that's kind of been put on the shelves for a few years,
and seeing where you can go with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Hyper Light Drifter is a game that comes to mind for that. It doesn't particularly feel like a game from the 90s because it's so fast paced. But definitely has a style of visuals that they try to evolve in a very successful way. A third category I would add to your distinguisher there then is a game that tries to capitalize on the nostalgia renaissance, but that's all they do. Is sort of like trying to just through buzzwords attract an audience. So like the retro gaming audience is weird to define. Nobody really knows how many numbers there are there. I admit that I'm sort of a fence walker when it comes to it. Because like I've kept almost all my old stuff, so it's just natural for me to play retro gaming. Now I know a lot of retro gamers who are distinctly, I only play retro games and don't own a modern console. So I do both. I know a lot of people who play only modern stuff and have either, like gotten rid of their old stuff or have done trade-ins in order to get to the modern era. So it's weird when I talk to some retro gamers that are very anti-modern or resistant toward the modern, which is easy to do because we're all sectarian to an extent. As soon as you attach a
put
name,
that label on,
as soon as you get a banner to fly, then you're going to fly that banner as hard as you can, because that's human nature. Right. So but what's cool then is that Cosmic Star Heroine, to sort of bring this back, because I was rambling a little bit there. Cosmic Star Heroine sort of hits that sweet spot right in the middle, where it's not explicitly for people who want to relive those past experiences, although it could be for them, but it's not just for them. It's also for people who didn't grow up with that and want to experience it for the first time, but it's not just for them. And then it's also for people who just want to play a good game, regardless of whatever. wherever their duties lie.
Yeah, and I don't know what the sales numbers are. I mean, I hope they're great, because I would love to see Cosmic Star Heroine 2 or something just made by them again that is within the same kind of RPG vein. But it seems like they really hit a good a broad audience. They I would imagine would satisfy both of those camps, the people that are newer to the retro gaming, that are younger, and then those that have played it back then. So they have a bit more of that accessibility, but still really giving those old school vibes that are just spot on. So I was trying to think like how do you quantify that retro like feel, and how do you if you were like to teach a seminar on like, oh, this is how you make a retro game,
I would love to teach that seminar.
Yeah.
As soon as you said that, I was like, I would love to do that.
It would be hard to because if somebody were listening and then they applied all these things, they could come out with something that just totally sucks and doesn't hit the mark, because there's just some undefinable quality that determines whether you really nailed it or you're just copying it. And this game, I feel like, was the only way I could say is like a natural like progression from like, as if they because that genre died out in a sense, or at least for a while, and it's kind of brought back. But it's a kind of a left behind genre.
Which genre are you speaking of? JRPG?
Yeah, well, like JRPG, yeah.
And
but not necessarily. I mean, because it still continues nowadays, but the old school JRPG,
right?
Yeah, and but yeah, so I mean, it feels like they just took that point in time where it seemed to die, or was like in its golden age, maybe like Chrono Trigger, and some of the earlier Final Fantasy 6, 4, and and just evolved, the next stage of that, like as if they were back in that time, and they were thinking, and they were just a rival company, and thinking what they can do to compete with those competitors, rather than having, always, rather than referencing those competing titles and saying, oh, we're just like these guys, like that's what a lot of the marketing around retro games nowadays is like,
yes,
we're just like, Final Fantasy or like Zelda, or and there was a little bit of like, this is similar to Chrono Trigger, but that wasn't like what it stood on. It wasn't like the shoulders, like the crux of it all.
Right.
It was just like, it's natural for humans just to make those comparisons. To it's an easy way to convey something that's really complex and deep, in a short amount of time. So
through association,
right, exactly.
Right, yeah.
So that. I can see why there'd be a little of that, but it didn't it didn't rest on that to be successful. And so I feel like this could have come out a year after Chrono Trigger did, and it was maybe on the Sega Genesis, or maybe it was another Nintendo title, and it was just meant to compete with them. And so yeah, so it felt like you would be sifting through Blockbuster, shelves, for the next game to rent, and you would see this game, even the cover art on there, looks like it's something back from the 90s.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a bunch of good points there. Lots of things to unpack. That's an interesting phrasing there that I hadn't really heard before about this game. That it feels like it's not so much a copycat as it is something that you would expect as a rival from that era.
Mm-hmm.
I dig that, because that seems very genuine toward this game. A question I wrote down is, what makes it so evocative of the games of yesteryear? So to sort of unpack the thoughts that you just put forward just now, I guess one of the first things we could touch on is the JRPG.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that I talked about before, I think on this podcast and on other podcasts, about what a JRPG is, what sort of makes it special. So I don't want to like run over all that ground again. But you mentioned how JRPGs as a genre or subgenre, however you want to delineate it, that they were different back then than toward today. Today, it seems like the JRPG is much more on the back burner. Whereas back in the day, the JRPG was like the big title.
Oh yeah, those were the triple A's, and nowadays they're more like double A's, at best.
Well, what was that game? A Nier Automata.
Right. Yeah.
Is a JRPG, right? Is it a hack and slash?
I mean, yeah, it's hack and slash,
but with
gameplay, but
RPG elements.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So probably the newest JRPG that I played was Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which to me seems very much what JRPGs are like today. Just a bunch of multi-haired characters screaming words. But very long, convoluted storylines, which sort of, I guess, hasn't changed too much since the 90s. But a lot of emphasis on anime.
Right.
A lot. And there's so much baggage that comes with that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
and it's gone the same way of anime, where it's just almost a parody of itself.
See, no, I don't watch anime anymore. Except for Cowboy Bebop once a year. Yeah. But that's about it. Do you still watch anime?
Yeah, I'm not like a lot, and it's only like select ones that really seem unique nowadays. But like I have a Funimation subscription, and there are some really good titles on there. A lot of them were from the past, but you see a lot of just anime that comes out that it's just cookie cutter. I mean, like you could just cut and paste any character and just put them together in this random situation.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that like anime is the only kind of entertainment that does that. Certainly, like, I mean, American blockbuster films do that constantly. Yeah, which is aggravating about them, but that's why I don't go and watch like every movie that comes out.
Yeah, but there's always those gems, and but games, the JRPGs, as we're those have also gone similarly, where the ones that have been able to persist through the years, that are, some of them may not even come to America, but they also just kind of are parodying what they used to do back in the 90s, and there's like, but not really trying to reinvent themselves or just evolve or anything like that.
Yeah. One thing that I really appreciated, and I don't think this works today, so like games in the West, RPGs especially in the West, are massive. Multiple hour RPGs, right? I just don't think that works with JRPGs. I don't. I think, well, personally, I find it grating to an extent. But I think that the manageable, the digestible, the perfect package of JRPGs of the past were that you could finish them within a decent period of time, 20, 30, 40 hours, and you're done. So it wasn't so long.
Right.
And they were able to use the game as a vehicle to tell a story that had a beginning and an end, in some cases multiple ends, as in Chrono Trigger. But it seemed like a much more seamless kind of game to play because you could start it and you could finish it. Yeah. Whereas today, it seems like a lot of big games like that, you can stay and you can play it and they invite you to stay in the world for too long. Yep. There's too much grinding, there's too much side quests, too much filler, where I just don't think a lot of that needs to be there. Maybe in the next decade, maybe in the 2020s, we'll see a kind of a return to leanness in game design. I don't think every game needs to be lean. But certainly games that are that huge need to have good reason, I think, to be that huge. Yeah,
I think that's what, you lose a bit of with those open world RPGs. They just don't have that what's the word?
Like a force of impact.
Yeah. They don't have that, that drive to get you to keep you going forward. So,
Right.
and eventually it'll launch you, but then you just get bogged down with all this.
Right.
resistance.
It's sort of like the drive there is to just experience as much of that world as possible, but that's not the same thing as being driven to finish a story.
Yeah, I mean, because you could tell the game designers, they want you, they need you to explore this world and spend time in it, you know. So it's like, and so they're gonna do every underhanded tactic to try to, to try to get you there and keep you there. But it's just so disingenuous that you don't. It's just like, I don't want to be doing this, but there's an impulse in me as a human to maybe try to be, or maybe as a completionist to try to do all these different things, but I don't really want to, it doesn't, I don't have that drive.
Perfect example of what you're talking about. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 had this system in battle where you attached blades, which were these living weapons, to your characters, sexy anime characters, essentially. Think that. Attached to your characters. And they would give you different abilities to attack and things like that. There was like a time-based sort of triggering of different abilities, and you could combine them. It was fairly complex, and I think that was the interesting part of it. But there were multiple blades to collect in the game. At first, I was like, "Oh, that's pretty cool," and I got hooked on trying to find as many blades as possible. Unfortunately, the way that you found most of the blades in the game was through a random loot box style process, where you would find a crystal, attach the crystal to somebody, it would open up, and a blade would pop out. Now, you could just get common blades from that, though.
Yeah.
So it felt like you were just like, I would pop 100 crystals and get like maybe, a handful of uncommon or rare blades, and then just be stuck with all these commons and are like, gotta delete it. It felt like a trading card game or, just any other abusive. It's sort of stereotypical to complain about loot boxes, I guess, but that was one specific instance where I didn't like it. I don't have a ton of experience with loot boxes, but that was one experience where the style of that content, where it was so randomized. And then I read too that it increased the probability of getting a rare blade decreased the more that you collected.
Really?
I was like, that stinks. Like,
man.
I played over 100 hours on that game and I didn't even get all the blades. And I spent like a week grinding for blades too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was just a weird.
And I think that there's a huge increase, in the gaming industry to employ those compulsory tactics. Loot boxes obviously is a big one, but you see it especially in mobile games, but you see it in creeping a lot into a lot of the console games nowadays, where it tests your patience. So if it's like you could do all this, max out on this, if you spend 100 hours, every waking moment of your life, on this, but why don't you just pay $10 here and then we'll just we'll boost you over there. So there's a lot of different tactics that they use to try to squeeze as much money out of you as they can, and a part of it is the cost of games, part of it's maybe shareholders, but it's not the way I want to see the industry going.
Right. It's sort of like to create. So you think of games, and this kind of hinges back into what we were talking about. So when you bought Final Fantasy IV, when you bought Final Fantasy VI, you were buying a complete game.
Yeah.
You were buying everything that was already ever going to be in that game. Now, given that patches are a good thing to an extent, I think. It's kind of silly when you buy a new game and they're like, oh, here's a 2 billion gig patch. Like, what? But if a game's broken and it can be fixed, that's good. Yeah. That's cool. And games in the past had broken features as well. I mean, there's glitches in Final Fantasy VI and so on. But a lot of those things are fun to discover or to abuse too in some instances.
It's like a metagame.
Right, exactly. But the point being though that you would buy the game and it'd be complete. But I think today there's a production value in games as a platform for continued income for the studio, the developer, the publisher, whatever. Yeah. So that a game publishes, but then it can continue to earn money from the player beyond just the initial purchase. Yeah. Which is a valuable business model because obviously then your game has that much more of value that you can get out of it. And like you said, given how expensive games are, especially the big ones.
Yeah, the AAAs.
Yeah. The AAAs are hugely expensive and they take years and
it's huge risk. Huge risk.
Yeah. Which I think is why we get into all sorts of things about AAAs fitting into a certain category of gameplay and including a lot of the same things, because then that's sort of a guaranteed return.
Yeah.
So like with Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Spider-Man didn't really take a lot of risks, but it shouldn't, right? Because they needed to make money off of Spider-Man.
Yeah, so you have formulas and stuff like that. They help mitigate risk, as is like some of those other business models that we mentioned, loot boxes and microtransactions. They mitigate risk, and that helps shareholders, be okay with going forward with the project instead of canceling it. So it's a cycle, and sometimes you do get some good ones in there that it's like, I wouldn't mind paying more money for extra content.
And that's a good point. This doesn't necessarily, it can really come off as especially if we're talking about retro games, it can really come off as like an old guard kind of like this, everything about modern gaming is trash and stuff like that. But I don't think we're talking in terms of quality. Right? We're talking in terms just of business practice. So we're not saying that, all business practices are great or all business practices are wrong. And we're not saying that games that use these practices that don't take risks or that rely on formula are bad. Like, you have to judge each game individually, right? So just because it uses certain things doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a certain way.
Yeah.
Across the board for all games.
Yeah.
Okay. To get that clarified.
And then just one little last example. I know I probably got us a little bit off topic, but
no, this is good. Forget topics.
Yeah. What were we talking about? What game? No. This is a No Man's Sky podcast, right? No, because I'm about to bring it up again. Because No Man's Sky is a really great example of. And I love to see it on this category of best continuing games or something like that. But it's they are constantly releasing new content that is expanding it. And it's free. But the thing is, like, for me, I would more than 100% be willing to pay for some of this content. You know what I mean? It's like I don't want you guys to run out of money. I want you guys to keep supporting this game, so
it seems like in the instance of No Man's Sky, those things are actually selling the game, because a lot of people had beef with No Man's Sky when it first released, and now it seems the game has really become a different kind of game. I haven't played it myself, but that's been my impression as more and more content is rolling out. I was like, oh, that seems to really change the kind of gameplay, the kind of experience that you get from this game. So it seems like every time they roll that out, I bet they get a boost in sales.
I would imagine so.
Right? Because people who were like, "Oh, that's an intriguing concept, but I'm not sure." But then they roll out these, updates, and people are like, "That's a cool idea. I want to get in on that." So that's what I would imagine happens.
That's true.
Because it certainly made it more appealing to me over time.
And and there's a little bit of diminishing returns there, because the cost of the game, the price of the game is it shrinks over time, and then you're also going to attract less people. So it does lower a little bit your incentive to continue to produce free content, for like years and years. But overall, that you're very 100% right there. Especially with some of the really large updates like Waking Titan and the No Man's Sky Next, when it launched on Xbox, a really good next new flood of players in there. So, but my point was that I think having additional content that you can buy is perfectly good if you really put your passion and value into it and make it valuable for the customer where they want it, as opposed to feel compulsed to buy it because just to keep up or just to overcome some natural tendency to be completionist or
in that
impatience.
instance, it's changing the game for the better.
Yeah.
So that's a perfectly viable use of that model to be able to update this game, make it more palatable, and so on and so forth.
And so for me, like I would love to see this game continue for years and years. So it's like, eventually I like to see some, DLC that, if money becomes an issue, for them to put put something like a paid DLC so they can continue rather than just having it fall off because it's not their free content isn't pushing as many sales anymore. So yeah.
So coming back to Cosmic Star, I think the thing that we were hitting on with that was its length. It's not linearity. That's not the right word. It's manageable storyline to where it's not a game where you pick it up and you're going to spend so long of a time in it. I can't remember exactly how long it took me to beat, but it wasn't long at all.
No, right.
Which felt really refreshing, actually, because most games that I'll pick up today, I'm like, well, there goes my next 2 months.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just want to have an experience like that, without necessarily playing a game from the 90s, but something that feels that, I hate to keep using the term manageable, but that's what it is. It feels like something that you can tackle in a decent amount of time and not get bogged down in doing all kinds of busy work.
Yeah.
So that was something that I really appreciated about it. And I think it was something that was really evocative of the games of yesteryear. Another thing certainly was the gameplay, how it funneled you into situations where the storyline prescribed which characters you had to use. And that certainly employed a different area of strategy. So another game we reference a lot, fortunately or unfortunately, is Final Fantasy 15. Right? Games like that start you off with your base set of characters, and then that's it. Also, it seems like a lot of RPGs have moved into where every character is so customizable to the point of not having any distinctness to themselves beyond sort of their personality and what they contribute to the story. The cool thing about Cosmic Star then is that it's a very traditional old school kind of game where each character has an elemental affinity and a set amount of spells or abilities or attacks that they have to stick with. So you can't turn Dave into Alyssa. You can't turn Saib into Orson. Like, you have to figure out how to use these characters in interesting combinations that'll work for you. And the game's quite hard at some points.
For sure.
I like died and I was like, what the? Like, excuse you, I've been playing games like this since I was a wee lad. And getting my butt handed to me was refreshing too, in a sense, because it was saying to me, every time you get a game over, the game is telling you something. It's telling you that you failed at its puzzle. You made a misstep. It could be the game's fault, and that's the worst thing, right? If the game has terrible design and then you get a game over, then that's your fault game. But I didn't feel that way when I played Cosmic Star. I felt like that was my mistake. I should have thought better about how to design my team, or better utilize the team that I had.
Absolutely. I mean, it was that's what I loved about the game, is just, it was so tight, especially, I mean, like, even just the normal difficulty, which I played it on.
Oh gosh, because it had multiple difficulties, right?
Oh,
I forgot about
the hardest
that.
one was I had to play a little bit just to get the trophy for that one. And it was brutal. I was like, oh man, I'm not even attempting this thing. Like, you have to like get every single little thing right. But even just the normal, like, it really emphasized, like, I mean, there's a lot less margin for error, which was kind of key back. You would experience a little bit more of that back in the old RPGs, and but especially with this one, you can like you said, you had to get the right party makeup. You just basically couldn't really waste moves. You had to utilize every turn you had, because things would ramp up as time went on in the game, which I really love that design as well. So a couple of things there, just so for people who haven't played this. You're referring to an aspect of the gameplay. I'm sure neither of us remember specifically what it's called. Was it style or something
Maybe
like
it was
that?
Style, yeah. I think you're right. Where damage increased over time. Right? From your enemies and from yourself too, unless you spent your style points on big moves and things like that. So there's that. Another thing was you could only use, this was really interesting, you could only use a character's ability once and then it deactivated. And the way to reactivate that was to defend.
Yeah.
So you had to really time not just the order of your moves, but you had to time when to defend and recharge them.
Yeah, and it was almost like you had to build a deck of your moves that you're going to do for your turn. You know, like this person's move would play off of this person's move, and this one would cover this one while this one defends, and you know, so you had to think not just of what do I want to do for this person's move for this turn. You would have to think, you know, 5 steps ahead to see how it would play out in your minds, and then you know that's where you lose, and you have to keep repeating over to try to find that perfect formula.
Yeah, and that felt so good.
Oh yeah,
it was amazing when it worked.
Oh yeah,
too. When a game makes you do hard work like that, not busy work, but makes you think, and then you win, then you feel a real good sense of accomplishment from that.
Yep.
Oh gosh, what was I gonna say? So now today, ARPGs are really popular, action RPGs, right? So I think what helps me think about why Cosmic Star feels so placed within that era from the past is it feels more like a board game rather than watching a movie, I guess.
Yeah.
So a lot of RPGs today or play like hack and slashes where you could even in some cases, well, in Final Fantasy 15, just mash a button or even hold down a button to beat a battle. So it looks real awesome. It looks like the action movie that you wanted to see. And there's places for that, but we're making a distinction here. So I think I remarked to you when I was playing Cosmic Star that it felt like chess. It felt like an advanced form of chess where there were more rules on top of each different piece, but it really felt like you had to know the pieces that you had. You had to know what they were good at, and you had to really try to define what each role was going to be. Yeah. And there was some fluctuation within that. You could use one character as your prime healer, you know, or you could use a different character as your prime healer. So I typically used Alyssa as prime damage dealer. I used Sean a lot for healing. And then, so like, what were some of your favorite characters? There was Alyssa, Sean, Dave.
Yeah, for the most part, I had, I think it was the starting four for a lot, because, you know, Alyssa, was really good. Really, I mean, as most heroes or heroines in the game, they're the most versatile. You know, so she has good damage, but she also has the healing. But then, you know, Dave, he's the tech guy, right?
Yeah, he was almost like a saboteur in the Final Fantasy 13 sense, like a debuffer.
Yeah, so he had some really interesting ones. Like, there wasn't a lot, like, not all of his skills were useful, but there were some pretty good ones. And then Chan, I guess, pronounce her name. She, I used her quite a bit, even though it was always a little awkward. I couldn't find the perfect strategy for her, but I always tried to use her because she did have some really good moves.
Yeah, she had what I did with her a lot was the ability that lets her guns affect all enemies.
Yeah.
And then or all targets,
right.
I guess. And then I would either, depending on the place in the battle, typically early battle, I would use her flare gun and target all enemies. And then if I was mid battle, then that was cool that you could switch it to healing if you needed to. And then she had that repeat, I think it was called recoil, where she could repeat the same attack. So it's like extra damage at the beginning or mid battle. If you're really hurting for that healing, you could use it again the next round. So that was useful. And so I always had to kind of change her strategy, you know, throughout the game to fit that party. And then, you know, Sue was a really cool character. And I mean, he was a powerhouse, and just his what was it, the counter attack move that was really good. You know, I mean, you just get a bunch of free hits, and you know, so but you know, and then he also had one killer one too that you would use to just do a ton of damage, and I think it might have knocked him out. I can't remember, but or something. Or it was like a self-destruct kind of a thing, right?
Yeah. And that was pretty useful later on. We could just finish off a boss fight with that.
Yeah.
But then later on, I ended up getting getting a really good, almost I don't know, it felt kind of cheap, I guess, but strategy going with that. Was it Saib?
Saib, yeah.
Where you could just spam like the AoE heal and damage, and I mean you could just keep going. And I can't remember exactly what the strategy was, but I mean, you basically didn't have to worry too much once you got him in the party.
Yeah. Your favorite character, I think you said at one point, was Sue, right? Or do you remember? Sue was one of those characters that was just like so cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's
like really
for sure,
cool.
yeah, one of the top ones. I can't remember if, he might. I don't know. I think I did end up saying he was my favorite. Him, and then Sean was pretty cool too.
Yeah,
as a character. But yeah,
I really liked. So a couple of other characters were Lauren, that was the singer.
Mm-hmm.
Finn was the police officer. Arit or Arete, I don't know how you pronounce it, because this is, again, evocative of the 90s before everything had voice acting, which is great, because I would much rather have to read than this game have crappy voice acting.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many games where I'm like, this game has terrible voice acting, why'd they even do that? Like, just make you read, that's so much better. You can imagine the voices. Then there was Clark, the dancing robot, which I expected to like more than I actually did.
Yeah.
He was kind of just one note. And then there's Saib. Orson was cool. He was like that detective guy.
Yeah.
And then my favorite character by far was however you pronounce it.
Zorv.
Yeah, it's Z''XORV. Zorv. He was the intergalactic bounty hunter.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
He was really cool. But for me, I don't know if I was just doing something wrong. I didn't. It was near the end of the game, I think, when you get him. So I just kind of had my party set. I was like, I didn't want to fiddle too much. But I had a hard time getting the Mac. Like, I mean, he seemed like he was going to be a really good damage dealer. But then whenever in practice I would use him, it didn't really seem.
Yeah, maybe. So the way that I thought of Zorv was as a glass hammer.
Okay.
He could hit extremely hard, but his, at the cost of his either HP or defense, or So I treated him as such. The longer the battle went on, I would just make sure he kept doing more and more damage. And if he'd pass out, try and revive him. He had an auto revive, I think, too.
Oh yeah.
But he could really churn out the damage. But you kind of had to be okay with him dying.
Yeah.
At the same time. So if you played it a little safe, then like with all the other characters, you're sort of trained that way. And like you said, Zorv is sort of a late game character, even though he pops up maybe like twice throughout the storyline before that. It seemed like you had to consciously be like, well, if you're going to die, at least do like straight nines. At least do like a ton of damage before you kick the bucket.
So he was pretty cool. Yeah.
I just like the look of him.
Oh,
and
yeah.
like, of course, the idea of an intergalactic bounty hunter that's like an alien. Like it's freaking like you look like Piccolo and like a UFO combined. It just looks like super cool. But yeah, this game had a huge cast.
Oh yeah.
And that was something, so this reminded me of Final Fantasy IV. 4 had a really, really, really big cast. Before Final Fantasy cast's been getting smaller.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it seems like it.
That just dawned on me.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, we're down to 4 now.
Yeah. There you go. Anyways, and the MMO you were telling me earlier in 11, you only played as one character.
Yeah.
So there you go. Anyways, just a weird thought. But yeah, Final Fantasy IV had a pretty big cast that the game forced you to ditch at certain points. Not that you could choose, but it was just like Sid jumps off the airship, or the twins were like, well, we're going to stop this. And things would happen that constrain you into using a certain combination of characters. I like that, and I wish that RPGs would do it more again, because again, it forces you to think in situations to where you're not comfortable using this character.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not your favorite character. So like in places in Cosmic Star, so you mentioned Zorv was a late game character, so you could kind of choose not to use him. But there were like maybe, I think it was 2 or 3 times where you had to, right? And then there were a couple characters that I didn't care for, like Arit and Finn.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't care. But the game forces you to use them anyway. And then you have to be smart about their abilities. You have to get accustomed to their abilities or you're going to lose.
Yeah.
You know, because like we said, the game was pretty hard. And that's all stuff that I find real fascinating.
Yeah.
Because that sort of gets you to think outside of your box, outside of your comfort zone in unique ways.
Yeah, and then for me, the one that stuck out to me the most was Clark. His was, I don't know, just seemed a little prolonged, he was a really different character, and you had to really adjust the way you did your play style.
He was the dancer, right?
Yeah.
So he was kind of like a bard.
He was like a bard,
yeah,
for sure. But yeah, so those kind of characters are always a little hard to work in.
Well, think about it. I mean, like if you have the choice between damage dealers and healers and a bard,
yeah,
you're not gonna choose the bard,
right? Yeah, and then you have the added thing where he can self-destruct, and then I don't know, he had some really weird moves.
Yeah.
So and then you had to use him for quite a while, escaping out of jail, I think it was. So, anyways, yeah. But to your point though, yeah, just having I think each character, had a point when you first got them where you had to use them, and and it was really neat to be able to at least understand them enough to where you feel like they're a character. They're a part of your party. Like they're not just another throwaway person lost in the crowd. They're
right.
You've played them enough to where you understand their nuances and all that, and they have personality that comes through in gameplay. So yeah.
So they didn't just seem like a footnote in the story. Like so their story effect might have been minimal, but the gameplay forces you to have to think about them.
Yeah,
even though you might not have normally. There's a quote here that I liked. This is from Sternberg. Not sure I pronounced that correctly. Sorry if you're listening. Of Z Boyd Games. He said, "I'd say that a big point for us early on was pacing. We know that some of the games in the Japanese-style RPG genre have, of late, tended to have a lot of filler or areas of the game that drag, especially back when we conceptualized Cosmic Star Heroine many years ago. What we wanted to do was look back at smaller scale, classic RPGs that have stood the test of time and ask ourselves why they felt like they held up over the years. Pacing was a crucial aspect of this. Less grind, less filler, less wasted time for the player was our goal, but not just in a way that keeps the player moving, but also to place areas of break time between tough or long dungeons. Give the player a break to explore or indulge in some story or world building, or gear up before bigger or longer dungeons." Now he was making that that claim in it was on an article on Gama Sutra, but specifically in a section where he was talking about Chrono Trigger.
And I gotta say that description or that approach is beautiful. I mean, it certainly that's golden. I mean, yeah.
Well, you remember way back when we started this podcast, way back a couple months ago, not that long ago, but we were talking about Journey, and we were specifically talking about the design philosophy of less is more. Sometimes it really does think like a lot of games are saying to you, hey, more is more.
Yeah.
But no, it's like, I don't want to just do the same thing essentially a million times and you're just reskinning it. I want you to give me content that's worthwhile, that feels like it's worthwhile. In terms of pacing, nobody really talks about pacing too much. But sometimes you'll play a game. I mean, you play a lot of games. I play a lot of games. I'm sure you know what we're talking about. Sometimes you'll play a game and you're just like, this game is a drag. It goes on and on and on and you're not getting anywhere, and you're like, your character's like, hey, if we just get to that next town, then all our problems will be solved. And you get there, and then they're like, like some maiden hits you in the face and she's like, oh, I'm so sorry, my son ran away. You're like, well, I don't care because I'm here to save the world. And they're like, no, please, my son. And then you have to like chase off of this brat, it takes you to a cave and you got to fight a giant boss. And so that, or I like what he was saying as well, in terms of giving the player breaks, giving you a breathing point. Games like film, they've got to breathe.
Yeah.
They have to allow you to have time to relax, to ease into a situation. That was something particularly with Final Fantasy 13 that I had some bones with. About the linearity. Interestingly, people have come to the defense of 13, as well they should in various areas.
Yeah.
But in terms of the linearity, by comparing it to the linearity of previous Final Fantasies. So I don't know if you've heard this. The linearity in Final Fantasy 13 is not unprecedented because Final Fantasy 10 was very linear.
Yeah, I don't know. Well,
I mean, do you remember those games enough to?
Well, and I definitely remember 10. I love that game, but I mean, it definitely didn't feel like 13.
Right.
So
10 still had breathing points.
Yeah, it did.
Right. You're reaching Luca for the first time. Even till you would go to the Mi'ihen High Road, and there would be places to stop. There would be places to like, oh, here you can do a bunch of chocobo stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for games to allow the player to have time to stop and explore, even if it's just within a little sphere, not too much.
Yeah.
Because then again, you're getting into the abuse of the open world structure to where it's like, okay, now you can have a breather for 100 hours.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, that's not exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, if there's going to be a linear story that's story heavy, then you've got to have some pacing for it. So, and yeah, Cosmic Star felt real great. There were times when I felt I didn't want to do side quest stuff. And that was okay. It didn't, I didn't feel like I missed out on anything.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I was under-equipped or something like that. But I felt like the pacing in Cosmic Star was real good.
Yeah, and a modern example, not to go too far off the path, but that just came to mind. A recent one, God of War, actually really has really interesting, good pacing that you don't really see as much nowadays, especially in the AAA sphere. It doesn't have. I mean, there's openness to it, and you can go and explore, but you don't feel like everybody's pulling you all these directions. Please save my son. Please, find my lost sheep. Whatever.
Yeah.
So it's
go
just,
get me 10 mushrooms in the forest.
So you could go and do that on your own, but it was a pretty lean game overall. I mean, there were side quests and stuff like that, and a lot of different extra things you could do, and even some really late game, challenges that you can tackle if you wanted to.
Yeah.
But
fighting Cthulhu.
Right.
Yeah. Did you fight him?
Yeah, I did actually.
Did you beat him?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It was.
I was meant to go back, and I just remember that right now. Yeah, I never did.
Yeah, those are always fun. I mean, Omega and Final Fantasy.
Yes, yes. You want that harder boss, Emerald Weapon,
and so that's like so for when it comes to like a game, we were just talking earlier about the games that try to keep you in, it's almost as a hostage, in their world, by having all these different gimmicks to try to have a complete experience. Back then in the JRPGs, they would keep you there because. Or you would want to stay there because of those extra challenges post game or whatever. At the end game, you could. There's always really really tough challenge at the end, level 99, that you would have to have a really tight strategy on. So they even threw that in there with Cthulhu, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and that feels very very much old school.
Yeah.
Not that they still do stuff like that, but that boss fight. Felt like it had to be there. I was meant to go back for it, but yeah. And sort of to close out this section of, I like that we spend so much time on it because I think it's such a crucial point of what makes Cosmic Star so special. Is the way that it balances that modernity with a sense of the antique, if I phrase it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, before I ask you this question, there's a little more of that Sternberg quote that I wanted to finish here that I just noticed. He is saying, Chrono Trigger is well known for its pacing. We wanted to apply a similar technique in Cosmic Star Heroine. Without going into too much depth, there's a flow to the game where it starts strong and fast and then eases you into the world, then escalates the conflicts, then eases back a bit before the finale. This is interspersed with a varying degree of story, world building, and exploration. So definitely true of Chrono Trigger. But I like that Cosmic Star starts off with an action set piece, right? So you're Dave, Chan, Alyssa LaSalle, of course, your Cosmic Star Heroine, who are leading this mission, right, to climb this tower and fight off some terrorists that work for like a federal organization. And then, not to spoil too much, but there's a whole adventure that happens, obviously. But even to that, openings feels a lot like the bombing mission on Final Fantasy VII. I'm sure,
just thinking of that.
Tons of people have drawn that conclusion. So there's a lot about it that feels perfectly classic.
Oh yeah.
But where were you in the 90s, though? So just to sort of get a little, this is sort of in retrospect after all we've talked about, but the 90s for people like us was sort of when we fell in love with games. I mean, I played a smattering of games in the 80s, late 80s. I was born in 85. So I remember playing, the real early stuff for me was Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. And I remember playing a Commodore 64. But those were pastimes. At that point. It wasn't until the 90s, specifically the Super Nintendo and the PlayStation, when it felt like gaming belonged to me, when it felt like it was telling me stories. So what were some of the consoles that you had growing up? Do you remember your first?
Well, my first big one, or that I spent a lot of time with, was the Sega Genesis. So I just had a ton of, we got a lot of mileage out of that thing. I mean, we went through like several consoles, just using it over and over again. But, that was my main thing for a long time. We did have, I don't even know when we got it. I mean, we might have just had it for a while. Was the original Nintendo, and we had a few games. We never really bought more games for it, but we had like Duck Hunt, Super Mario. So we had a lot of the classics, Castlevania. We had Blades of Steel. I would play those, but so I did play them, and I had a lot of fun with it. But I just didn't like it. Wasn't current. It felt like I was just.
You're already then reliving the past.
Yeah.
Especially if you had a Genesis.
Yeah.
How old are you? What year were you born?
I was born in 86.
Okay. So we're practically the same age.
Yeah. And so I start off with mainly with the Genesis, had a lot, but it was I mean, I played it a lot, but it was casual in the sense that I mean I was young. I didn't have like a lot of the deeper, thoughts and emotions but that came along when I really got hooked like in a real personal internal level, was more in the later 90s when Final Fantasy VIII, which I referenced a lot because that was what game changer for me.
And that's your favorite Final Fantasy, right?
Yeah,
was 8?
Yeah, that's what brought me into RPGs. That games could be just more than just having fun, doing side scrollers and and the like. So,
do you remember playing an RPG before 8? Out of curiosity?
No.
So that was your gateway.
I think so.
And a lot of people, I mean, I hadn't heard that too much with 8, but certainly 7 was a lot of people's gateway into the world of RPGs. I remember that was the game that sold the PS1 for me too.
Yeah.
I was like, I want to play 7.
Yeah.
But for me it was some of the Super Nintendo stuff. I think it was Breath of Fire before Final Fantasy VI for me. But I remember playing some of the real old RPGs. There's going to be some people out there who are like, Final Fantasy VI isn't even old. Like, look, okay, we were born in 85. Like, I was born in 85. So, like, by 95, I was 10.
Yeah.
It's not like I was playing... Like, I wasn't playing Final Fantasy 1,
No.
Like, I never owned it as a kid.
Yeah.
Or anything like that. I didn't play Phantasy Star as a kid. My RPG bread and butter was a lot of Breath of Fires, a lot of the Final Fantasies, and some of the obscure stuff here and there. But, none of the main huge series stuff. But, so anyway, 8 was your gateway into the world of what video games can do as far as storytelling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that was a huge moment, and but even before that, I was just playing games constantly, and yeah, so in the 90s, I was playing. I eventually went from Sega Genesis to. Well, actually, I did have a 32X, but it felt more like an upgrade than an actual new console.
I don't even know if I've seen one.
It was ridiculous. You just sit this whole thing on top of the Genesis.
Yeah,
I don't know. It was. Weird.
I mean, in person, I don't think I've ever seen one in person. But
yeah. But we got Sonic and Knuckles out of it. That was fun. And played some racing games on there. But going on from that to the N64, I think was my next one.
Oh, you did have an N64.
Yeah.
So you had it contemporaneously with the PS1?
Well, I had it actually before the PS1.
Oh, okay.
So I did a little backwards, but I mean, when it comes to, because I think the PS1 came out before, right?
I think the 64 was first.
Oh, really? Okay, I don't know.
Yeah.
It wasn't even on my radar. Like, I had a very limited scope of what was actually going on in the landscape.
This is a pre-internet age that we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, September 96 was the N64. I remember when it came out because it was all throughout the Costco that we used to go to all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just like, it's in 3D? Like, it's not actually in 3D because it doesn't jump out of the TV, but it had 3D environments, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like asking for your for your qualification, right? It did, right?
Yeah.
And then September 95. So you're right. I was wrong. Yeah. So a year earlier was the PS1, and then, but yeah. So that's weird. I remember seeing a 64 first. But anyway, so you got a 64 first.
So I did, yeah. I think my parents asked me what I wanted next, and I really was excited to play Star Fox 64. So I kind of did a reverse order where we were able to purchase the game and the console at the same time and the guide, and but I didn't get to open the console until I think it was the Christmas. And so, so I was just spending like every waking moment looking through the guide and memorizing everything.
But that's cool. You got to look through the guide at least.
Yeah, and then like
funny.
looking at the back of the box, and it was like this big old box because it had the Rumble Pack in there. And
yeah.
So I had some really good memories on there, a lot of good games on there. And then I got a little bit older. I started getting interest in some of the PlayStation games, and got into a lot of games there.
So you remember that release year that you got the 64?
I don't.
You have been 10 or something like that?
I would be surprised if it was. I feel like it might have been a year or so after. Yeah.
So then by the time you started getting into, and this is all speculation, of course, by the time you started getting into the PS1 stuff, as far as interest, that definitely would have been the time that Sony was overtaking the market share from Nintendo, because the 64 and the PlayStation were like not an even battle at all. I think early on the 64 had a lot of cool traction, but it certainly could not keep up with nobody could keep up.
Yeah,
like this was this was the first console to have, like, I think I'm spouting out all these like historical like figures and stuff like that, and like wrong about them. So I'll probably be wrong about like the first console. Who cares? The first, I'm not a history book people. The first console that had over 1,000 games or whatever. It point being, it had a ton of games.
Yeah. So I definitely felt that pull, after having the 64 for a while. I mean, there were some really good games at the beginning, GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie, the Super Mario 64. But then, after a while, it was like kind of feeling that tug that,
right.
I think all the action's over on PlayStation.
Right. Yeah. Because I think that the longevity of the PS1 and the longevity of the 64 were not equal.
No.
Especially once the PS1 started rolling out the RPGs. Like I said, I liked RPGs from the Super Nintendo, but Nintendo did not keep up that momentum from the Super Nintendo onto the 64. It had a couple RPGs on the 64, but those are crap.
Yeah.
Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Like, there's not an RPG. Somebody out there is going to be like, "How dare you?" Like the N64 RPGs. Well, I honestly I can't think of like a stellar one in this moment, but. The JRPGs sort of migrated from the Super Nintendo to the PS1 and skipped the 64. And for me, I was already all about the JRPGs. I learned to read from Calvin and Hobbes and from games like Earthbound and Breath of Fire and stuff like that. Not learn to read like I was already like 9, 8, 7, 10, whatever.
Yeah.
But I learned to read good. Like I learned like new words and stuff. Yeah. Exactly. I was like, oh, what does melancholy mean? You know, and like, you like look it up in a pre-internet era.
Yeah.
It was hard to do.
Yep.
But okay, so then and then you've been with Sony ever since. You got a PS2, PS3, PS4.
Yeah. Pretty much. I mean, I had a GameCube in there for like a graduation present, but yeah, besides that, pretty much been Sony faithful since. I mean, I haven't really had a reason to leave, man. You know, it's all here.
Yeah,
everything.
Yeah, there's quite a bit there. Now earlier you were talking about getting with your daughter and playing some Pikachu, some Pokemon. Yeah, Let's Go. That's the Switch is a cool supplementary console. I think right now. My perspective on the consoles as they're laid out right now, and people are already talking about like the PS5 and stuff like that. And I was like, I'm not ready for it. I'm never ready for the new console.
It took you a while to get a PS4, right?
Yeah, like I haven't gotten a console at launch. Well, the Switch I got at launch.
Yeah.
But like I haven't gotten a console at launch for a long time. Maybe not since the PS1. But anyways, yeah, I think that the PS4 has more than enough content to not really want specifically anything else. The Switch, if you're a Nintendo fan or if you like any of those franchises that have been around for 30 years, the Switch has got a lot of cool stuff to play on, and as an indies platform, and then the portability. But being able to play with your child something like Pikachu Let's Go and stuff like that. Yeah. Are cool, but I don't know that I'm ready for new consoles. No, and I do have a little bit of an itch to get that. Well, oh no, I almost said a really lame rhyme there. An itch to get that Switch. Itch to get that Switch. Nintendo, if you're listening, we got a marketing specialist here for you. Yeah, copyright. So. Because of, I mean, I never really played and really got attached to, a lot of the Nintendo characters in their pantheon. Well, you've never played a Zelda game. I never played a Zelda game. This is now official, like out there. Yeah, Mario is. Don't tell anybody your address. Death threats. But Mario was just, didn't really have a personality. Right. I never. That's one of those like extremely casual. Yeah. Just like fun, but. Yeah, I never played a Metroid game either. Oh my god! But yeah, so I never really had attachment. But yeah, if you never had you had a GameCube for a wee bit, and there was Prime on there. But you never had a Wii, so yeah. So the only real game I did have an attachment to, though, that's related to Nintendo is Pokemon, and so. Who hasn't? Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, like a billion people play Pokemon. Yeah. So once they come out, I mean, so definitely Pokemon Let's Go. I would, is a big incentive for me to buy. But then I hear they're also going to be coming with a proper core RPG on console the first time. See, that would be me. I've always for years and years and years wished for that, and I say to myself, that once they come up with that, I'm definitely buying that console. And so if they're going to actually do that, I mean, for sure that's a done deal. Yeah. Because I mean, I still love Pokemon, and yeah. So maybe Sand will bring you a Switch for your sake, because let me know, because there's a lot of cool stuff that I'd recommend on there. Yeah, for sure. Octopath Traveler is a pretty good game. Definitely Zelda Breath of the Wild. I feel like you have to play a Zelda before Breath of the Wild to appreciate what Breath of the Wild is. Yeah, that's But yeah, maybe by the time you get one, there'll be like a way to play a past Zelda.
Well,
song or
actually,
something.
on the Nintendo Classic, or was it the? Anyways, yeah.
Oh yeah,
they have the Zelda games.
original.
Yeah.
right.
So
1 and 2.
yeah, they had
Don't
1
play
and
the
2.
second one.
Yeah.
have you played the second one?
I started up. I was like,
Holy smokes, that is a friggin' hard game. I
Yeah.
couldn't beat the first boss. I was like, how does anybody beat this? We've got somebody who writes for us, Hyper Active Coffee Mage. I almost said Hyper Light Drifter Mage.
Oh, man.
Who that second Zelda is his favorite Zelda, from familiarity and stuff like that. But yeah, I can't get into it. The first game though is an open world game on the NES.
Yeah,
that's pretty mind blowing.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
You need a guide for it though.
Yeah,
For
so
sure.
I tried it for a while, and it was really cool. And I even tried because I hadn't played Earthbound before, so I tried that. It was pretty cool to start that up.
That's a funny game.
Yeah,
As freaking, you gotta, it takes time to get into that because you're kind of like, what the,
yeah.
where's my dragons and wizards and swords and stuff? But that game gets, there's some hilarious stuff in Earthbound.
Yeah, so it's been cool being able to try some of those things for the first time.
Yeah,
but
there are so many. So kind of tie this section out.
Uh-huh.
There are so many experiences to be had in games. Like we were talking about at the beginning, it's a shame when you kind of get stuck under a banner. You kind of get stuck under a label.
Yeah.
You and I talk about this all the time in different terms, in private. But trying new things is, I think, a virtue. Unless it's like torturing puppies or whatever. Don't do that.
Right.
But trying new products, trying new experiences and entertainment are good things.
Yeah.
Sorry I talked about torturing puppies. Yeah, that was weird. I don't know, I'll probably edit that out. Somebody will be like, what the?
Yeah.
Why'd you say that? So yeah, trying new things, really good. It's always good to explore, try new genres. And that's what I'm trying to do all the time. There's a lot of things that I still want to catch up on. But coming back to Cosmic Star Heroine, just to kind of close this podcast out, if anything, I think we really focused on what makes a good retro throwback.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just say, this game is a retro throwback. There's so many games say that. So many games say pixel art evocative of the 90s and 80s and whatever. The golden age of arcades, I see a lot too. But it's like, if you're going to say golden age of arcades, then it better play like the golden age of the arcades. It better not just be like, oh, it looks like this, but it's not. It's, it's something else entirely. And with Cosmic Star Heroine, if I had to describe it in one word, I would say genuine. It feels like it has a lot of integrity. It feels like it's a game that knows what it wants to be. And that's high praise, I think. Yeah. There's a lot of games out there that are confused about their identity.
Yeah. And to me, it feels like, I don't know how to put it, but like, it just hits like that, to me, like when you're talking about retro games, it's not just enough to put a pixel art over it and call it retro and stuff. But in a way, like it just resets everything that you've done from being a child to, being to today, and brings you straight back to what you cared about, what you felt back then. You could even see that in the story. Like it's just, in a way, I guess, simple or naive in a way. I don't know, but
right. It's pure. It's
pure,
almost like you
go.
you don't get this highly sympathetic villain.
Yeah.
You don't get these characters that are constantly betraying each other or have dark, impossibly gritty pasts that are haunting them and torturing them. And you just get sort of this traditional good versus evil kind of tale. That's very, what's the right word for it? It's very specific, I guess you could say. It's very placed within a time period. Because again, I think today characters, you sort of demand so much from characters today that they have to be these encyclopedically dark,
Yeah.
and tortured characters. But so in that sense too, it was refreshing.
Yeah. So I love it. Yeah. Just like how it takes you back and it just assumes that colorful, like these archetypical characters are cool, like and that having these predictable kind of naive storylines are something that you would want to take seriously and just play for and have a good time with, and it just really doesn't take into account like that cynicism that we've kind of been able to develop over the years, and and just put you and assumes that inner child that's in you is still there and has just been sitting there patiently waiting for this new game to come out, and like it's going back to that image I brought back earlier with looking at that the shelves in Blockbuster for that new game, feels like it's fits right in there along with a lot of the classics. So.
Yeah, and I like what you mentioned there. Makes me think in terms of the main character, Alyssa being sort of not pure virtue. I'm trying to remember if she had a specific character flaw, but I can't recall one off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Again, they are very archetypal.
Mm-hmm.
They're not very cinematic in what you'd expect when we use the term cinematic for game storytelling specifically. But there's a time and a place for that kind of storytelling, almost like this fairy tale kind of storytelling. But something that is in that fairy tale storytelling, so not to call it so simple to say that it has no value, but to call it simple in that it's it's linear, it's transparent to an extent, but it's also virtuous.
Yeah.
Virtue is something that is sort of discarded for the sake of the hyper cool anti-hero of the day. This is something we kind of touched upon in our Arkham Asylum podcast too, if you want to hear more on that from a couple other guests that I had too. But it seems toward the end of the game, I don't really want to spoil it, but there are plot twists in the game, and one of them toward the end involved Alyssa having to believe the best in someone, and that is really, oh gosh, I almost used the term precious, but it's really precious. That's not what I meant. It's like the same thing as innocence.
Yeah,
like innocence is a substantial thing to have.
Yeah.
And it's something that, is good for a person.
Yeah.
So like not everybody is, just an incriminated, person that's walking around thinking the most cynical thing about everybody else. People aren't just like that. I run into a lot of people online who are like, I hate humans. I was like, well, you're talking to one right now. Why'd you make a social media account? It's like, yeah, like a social media account. Like, why be social if you hate humans? Anyways, but there is so much rampant cynicism. And in a way, games like this, games from the 90s, games that want to tell these simpler stories in terms of more compactness, want to remind us in a way that human beings aren't always cynical, that good does triumph over evil a lot, that the world isn't always, a dumpster fire, that there are good people who care about other people. And I keep thinking of the image of people forming a chain when the last hurricane, was it Harvey, I think, right? Hit the southern parts of the U.S. And, there's cars being swept away by floodwaters, and there's an image that's stuck in my mind since then of civilians forming a human chain with each other, linking arms to go and rescue a family from this SUV that was about to be swept away. And that sense of humans being able to set aside their selfishness, and believe me, I agree that humans are fundamentally selfish, self-centered. I'm not saying that human beings are fundamentally good. I don't think that at all. Not like, not in any terms.
Yeah.
But I think that human beings are capable of good.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what games like this sort of remind you.
Yeah.
You know, of. So I know a lot of folks, when I mentioned that I was going to talk about Cosmic Star Heroine, have not played it. A few of you mentioned even that you hadn't even heard of it before. I would definitely recommend playing it if you're a fan of games from the 90s and you want something that's not just going to pander to you in that sense, like, oh, retro throwback, and you start and you're like, this is not anything substantial. But it's a short enough game to where even if you don't completely like it, it's not going to suck up 2 months of your life.
Yeah.
You know, so it's something that you can play and stay with and enjoy, and whatever stays with you after that is good. So Cosmic Star Heroine by Ziboid Games. I hope you guys get to try it. In closing, similar titles that you'd recommend. Can you think of anything similar to this? Okay, let me ask you a more pointed question than that. This might work or it might not.
Okay.
Final Fantasy VIII.
Yeah.
Is there anything from Final Fantasy VIII that you see in Cosmic Star?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are some things that you can, I mean, that are gameplay wise that we mentioned, like, for instance, having to use characters, splitting up the group and all that. They do use a lot of those, you know, so there's, it does follow that similar pattern of going through portions of the story where you know, you're on rails, and then after that you get some breathing time. So you know, it harkens back to a lot of you know, a lot of those patterns that were really successful back then. And then, you know, the characters in 8 were a little bit more complex, I'd say, but in the end they were, you know, very recognizable. They're very you can you know, you can say there were, you know, somewhat archetypical as well, or archetypal. You know, there's the quiet leader. There's, you know, the loudmouth, energetic, you know, guy, and so, you know, you know, there's definitely a lot of that in there. Just a little bit more, maybe the next era of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. And 8 seemed like another game that believed in the best in people too.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely has some of those messages in there that were a lot more. I don't know. I can't even think of the word. But man, I can't think of the word. But but yeah, easier to you know, to come to grips with back then. So yeah. I'm trying to think here of other games.
The one that I was going to mention for my recommendation was I Am Setsuna.
Oh, okay.
Which I don't think you've played.
No.
But it was another one that was like inspired by you know, classic RPGs and so on and so forth. I mentioned Chrono Trigger a lot.
Yeah.
And that was another game that I felt actually delivered on a substantial RPG experience in terms of its gameplay and its structure that felt like it was from the 90s. Very beautiful game, very soft, gentle game, but good one. So.
Yeah. I mean, and then if we're going, you know, depends how far we're going back, but, you know, obviously, Chrono Trigger, and some of the earlier Final Fantasies. Suikoden definitely had some of that in there, especially with the larger cast and the different roles they would play outside of, you know, some of the base building, I guess you would call it, where you would collect characters, and they would and then you would see them in your base after you recruited them. So Chrono Cross too, and yeah, so those are some of the ones that immediately jumped to my mind.
Yeah, the recruitment of characters. That reminds me that on Twitter at Srick360, who mentioned he started it but hadn't gotten too far in it, said, one thing I heard about that got me excited was getting a spaceship. I want to see how that plays out. And I like that sort of changes the tone and the structure of the game at a certain point.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Let's see if there's anything else
Okay.
at this point. Yeah, a couple other responses we got on Twitter. One was from @RetroGifMonster. He said, have it on PS4 and I kickstarted it. I haven't finished it yet, though, because of the backlog, but I'm about halfway through. It's a great game. Not as much like Chrono Trigger as the graphics would have you think, but it's really great in its own right. I think they're getting at how it's a combination of influences. It's not like time traveling, and Chrono Trigger had its sci-fi, but it was also, like sci-fantasy.
Yeah.
I would say, whereas this is more strict sci-fi. This is from @Fritzstalgia on Twitter. Unpopular opinion. Oh, here we go. When you're marketing a game by referencing classic games as inspiration, and you offer a similar experience with few variations, why should someone play it instead of the originals? I think that's an honest question, though. How would you respond to that?
No, I mean, I totally agree. And, to me, I wasn't there, during the Kickstarter phase, and, I personally didn't even see any marketing on it. So, but I do know that there has been some, there's the, like we talked about earlier, talking about, referencing Chrono Trigger in there. And so, in the specific situation, why wouldn't you just go and play Chrono Trigger? Well, I absolutely should go play Chrono Trigger.
But if you played it 200 times, right, then you might be looking for a new experience.
Yeah, I mean, there's reasons why we have genres. We like certain patterns and formulas on how things are structured, how things work, and you can come in with certain expectations of storytelling and game mechanics. And so, you don't just play one open world and say that's it or whatever. There's a whole different variety, or same thing with RPGs, any genre. But they're not all the same. They offer something a little different. And this, this is definitely a very different experience than Chrono Trigger. There's similarities for sure. I mean, there's a reason why it's compared to it, but it just means that it's within that same kind of genre, same kind of even subgenre within the JRPG realm. But it is definitely a different game, and it doesn't rely on it as a crutch to have to be good. Right. So
and two, I think I would add that it's a combination of inspirations and influences. In a unique way, an interesting way. So it's sort of unfair to say it's just Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger is a big influence, but you can see a lot of different elements brought in from other series there. Certainly Final Fantasy. Phantasy Star is another one that I've seen referenced. Mass Effect is one that I've seen referenced, which is odd because that's a newer series, but it's still there as a reference anyway. So I think that why would you play it instead of some of the originals? Because you probably played the originals to death, as good as they are. You might be looking for a new experience. It depends on the consumer, but some people are satisfied with just playing the old one, and that's fine. That's what they get out of it. But I think as far as Cosmic Star, it feels like a unique combination of influences that maybe you haven't seen before or haven't seen elsewhere. It's challenging in its own right. It has its own story. The gameplay is satisfying.
And like you said earlier, using that word, I thought was perfect for it. It was genuine. It's I can understand his skepticism. I mean, if I'm interpreting it right, but there's a lot of just copycat games out there. A lot of games that just rely solely on that nostalgia, and that's why I was really pleasantly surprised with this game is how it didn't just pander to you on that basis, but it genuinely felt like a JRPG from that era, and stood up on its own.
No, and definitely that, like we mentioned the spaceship just a little while ago, we got from @WallyWallcakes on Twitter, who was mentioning how the game didn't really grab them. I think they mentioned they were about 8 hours in. So there's still a while left to go, even at 8 hours in. But the game seems like it changes a bit of the tonality and a bit of the style. Its structure, it seems less linear toward the end of the game. So there's that to look forward to, for sure. I think it's a game that isn't so uniform within itself, if that makes sense. Like it has enough variation over time to where so like if you don't like a certain character, if you don't like a certain feature, those things change.
Yeah.
As the game progresses. Okay. And then this is going to be a good final question to end on. This is from @EsperDreams. I've never even heard of this. My question would be, what makes this game a must-play for someone who has never heard about it? We've sort of been unpacking this whole time, but in a nutshell, what would make this game a must-play for someone who's never heard of it? Must-play is kind of hard. I think there's few games that are must-plays.
Yeah.
But, taking that sort of broadly, what would interest someone who's never heard of it?
Well, I mean, definitely understanding, if you have that background with an appreciation for RPGs, especially the early RPGs of yesteryear, this definitely would hit that note because of all the things we said in the podcast. But pretty much, because it's a really good, really genuine game that is genuinely fun. I mean, the gameplay mechanics, like we said, they're not just reusing old ones. Mm-hmm. They're reinventing within that subgenre, and so it's genuinely just a really fun game to play from an RPG perspective. And there's a really large, colorful cast. I mean, I love each character, the dialogue, and the story. It's just fun. I mean, and it doesn't get super dark or serious, and it doesn't get super complex, but it's fun, and it's not too simple to where it's just like, like why am I even
right.
bothering with it? But it. So it has that, good balance.
There's enough intrigue in the story to keep you invested.
Yep, exactly.
I would say I would hit on that gameplay specifically, that it does RPG gameplay in a concise, precise, and compact way that a lot of games seem to have set aside. And so if you want an RPG that will challenge you, that will force you to think strategically, that will cause you to have to make good moves in order to stay in the game, this is the game for you.
Yeah.
And again, it's manageable. It's not going to suck up a ton of your time. Mm-hmm. But I would definitely say, most people are probably fans to some extent, of games from the 90s. Mm-hmm. I haven't met anyone, I don't think, who was just like, 90s games suck. Like, I don't think I've met that person. Yeah. But I'm sure they're out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you have even the smallest inkling of love for that era, there's a lot that you would probably love in Cosmic Star. Mm-hmm. So thanks for being on this podcast with me, Cameron.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I don't know if this will be the last one that we do before you move.
Yeah.
But we'll have to continue doing them long distance.
Yeah.
So true. And thank you guys for listening. Have a good day.
Okay, bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of MAGE CAST as much as I did. If so, please follow, subscribe, share, and leave us a review to help us reach a wider audience. If you enjoy our work, please consider supporting us and our vision for the future of gaming conversations through patreon.com/The Well-Read Mage. Special thanks to my Mage League colleague, Brent Mead, for sound editing. The Mage Cast theme song, Post Atmosphere, was composed by fellow mage Russell Gordon and can be found on his YouTube and SoundCloud. This episode may be over, but the legend will live on, passed down by the dwarves, the elves, and the dragons.